Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caroline's podcast, The Cooldown. This is where we just chat about life, about my life, about things that happen to all of us, and the experiences that I've had that have had a bearing on my teaching, my life of teaching, and the classes that I teach, the connections that I have with the people that are in front of me, and just any general things that happen to all of us through the week. You're welcome to contact me at any time if you have anything you'd like to ask or anything you'd like to put out there also. You're more than welcome, and you can contact me at Caroline's Pilates, and I look forward to that. Those of you that know me and that come to class know that I'm a deep thinker. I'm also a very bad sleeper and have been all my life. So I stay up as late as I can, simply so that I'm not in bed for as long as I have to be. And I tried going to bed at 10 o'clock thinking, well, maybe that would work better, but I have to say it didn't. So I usually, excuse me, I usually go to bed maybe half 11, 12 o'clock, and then I wake about an hour and a half later and I drop off again and wake about an hour and a half after that, which would make me think about the issue of exercise and how good it is for all or most or a lot of the ills that people have in their daily life. Now, not chronic, really serious illnesses, but because I do teach quite a lot of classes, uh, and I do work out in the sea quite a lot, both with my classes and in between times on my own. It definitely doesn't help me to sleep, I have to say that. But and usually, yes, I have to say my head's full of thoughts as soon as I wake up. Uh, I was down at the water with my son Philip through the week there, and there's a big pole that sits up out of the water, and it is longer than it looks from a distance, but from a distance you can only see the bottom half. So when the tide is sort of low, you see that sticking out or up. And we were walking down, and I said to Philip, I said, "Do you see that pole sticking up out of the water, son?" I said, "That's very, that could be very dangerous if somebody didn't see that." And as we were, well, his answer to me was, Mummy, you're in management mode again." And he was quite right, because that was exactly what I was thinking. I thought, my God, if somebody didn't see that, they could hurt themselves. So when we were in the water, I could actually see it was taller than it looked from the shore side. So all was good. But yes, I probably have mentioned to you earlier in my other two podcasts that I think that was a very good description he said about me being in management mode. And I think as a carer from years and years and years back, um, you become like that because, both my children were terminally ill, and I've mentioned that before. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone who's listening to this, or anyone who's listening to this, I don't want my podcast to depress you in any way at all, but some of it is maybe tough listening to at times. You know what I mean? It is a lot about me and my life and the experiences I have had, and I have been around, illness and uh, things like that for all of my life, and still to a point do, because, my son still has aortic aneurysm. He has, stents and new stents put in 2016, and, all that. So you can't really get away from it. It's just part of who you are, and from having that from a young age, it sort of, I suppose, helps to form the way you think, the way you look at life, you know, um, and I suppose a lot of human nature is that we take a lot of things for granted. I like to think that because of the experiences that I have had, the losses that I've had from a very young age, I try not to take things for granted. But I suppose being human, we all do that. I would say I'm an eternal pessimist, which some people find, people like optimistic people. I'm optimistic in my teaching. I'm optimistic in how I relate to the people that I talk to. I always try and lift them. I try and, when they come to class and I feel like that they're just not themselves, you know what I mean? I will approach them, I will talk to them and, you know, um, just try and lift them and give them advice if I can, if it's useful, if I think it'll help them. I do. But in my own life, if the worst can happen, my glass is always, is it half empty? Um, yes, it's a difficult thing to be a pessimist, even in that aspect of life, because you want to be optimistic about things. You want to look at yourself and say, well, not everything can be bad. You know what I mean? But the minute that I would think, oh, well, this will turn out okay, it doesn't turn out okay. So I think life has a lot of reasons for why, you end up, as they say, grumpy old men, grumpy old women, grumpy old people, or whatever the case may be. It's not really that they're grumpy. I don't think anybody really wants to be grumpy. I just think that life is tough. It doesn't seem tough when you're young because you don't have time to think about it. You're just out there. You know what I mean? You want to jump over the moon. You want to have all the experiences that are out there for young people to have, and quite rightly so. But then, of course, our eyes are opened a little bit wider as the years roll on, and the things that worry young people when they're young, you know, just don't seem to be so important as people get older. But anyway, I'm off on a tangent. So, yes, management mode, that's me. So, in thinking about what I would chat to you about today, which I suppose I I'm sure as many of you will know, I taught for I think around 16 years in Cumber Leisure Centre, Kiltonga, before they passed it on or sold it, and Ars Leisure Centre. But I always had my own classes. They were the ones that I started off with. Um, and then for 9 years, at the same time, I was with the Culloden Hotel, David Lloyd's, and Esporta, which is at the moment Bannatynes. And so, yes, I was in teaching class one day and I had an accident and I slipped, tripped, fell, whatever, on a piece of tape that was on the floor and went down, just straight down like a brick. And I was in the middle of class, so I continued to verbally teach class, picked myself very quickly up off the floor, and realized that something wasn't right with my ankle. So I had a full class in front of me, and the ones at the front would have known, that something wasn't right. But once again, into management mode with me, continued to give my instruction and just picked myself up off the floor and just sat my bum on the edge of the staging. And I was pretty sure that there was something had happened, that either it was strained or whatever. So I think I had about 15, 20 minutes left of class to continue. And as things happen so quickly in your mind, I thought, well, I didn't want to stop the class in the middle. These people had, paid their fees or whatever. They'd got dressed to come out to meet a class. And I just didn't want to let them down. So I continued the class on and taught it from the stage with my arms and moving the legs that I could move and parts of them. And so that was all right. Class finished, and obviously, management did what they had to do. Came up, had a chat with me, and gave them all the ins and outs. And they helped me down the stairs. Class finished, waved everybody goodbye, And some of them were really, emotionally affected by what had happened, because I'd been teaching there for years and years. So um, you become like a bit like an extended family. The people in front of you, in as much as you know them being there with you, and sometimes you feel as if you're with those people more time than you're with your family. Although, having said that, I am not the kind of person who asks people about their personal life, or I find that people will come and offer, to tell me things or to ask me for advice, or when they're just feeling down. And that's wonderful. So, for as much as you could spend 16 years, on a regular weekly basis with a group of people, many of them I wouldn't have even known their surnames unless they had come to tell me that. Um, but you might have known more deeper things that people would have conveyed to you. And of course, they would always be private, and I would never, speak about those things. But anyway, my mum was in the class because, and many of you'll know as well, Mummy would have attended my classes also 3 a week. And a lot of the people that went to class were very fond of Mummy and sort of used her as a yardstick as to what you can do as you, get older, which was wonderful. Um, so I think obviously Mummy always stood towards the back, so she didn't know really what had happened. She knew there was a bit of a kerfuffle for a few minutes at the front, but that was it. So as she came down, I mean, you could see my ankle was swelling slightly, and so the people from the club helped me down the stairs, and then I continued to drive myself down to the accident emergency and went in, and of course it turned out that it was broken, and I was sent up to, I think they put a plaster on it down in Ards, yeah, but they were pretty sure that it was broken, so they fixed it up as best they could, and I had to go to the Ulster, and that was for me devastating, I have to say. And when I was thinking about what I would talk to you about today, that came into my head, and was just thinking there. I just said to you that I was trying to draw away from some of the things that you might hear in my podcast that would make you feel sad or make you feel down. That's not my intention. It's really just to share the opinions and feelings of somebody who, you know, is talking to you about experiences that they've had in their life. And many of you will have had the same experiences. And here I am again, lifting it up by telling you that I was teaching one day and broke my ankle and ended up in the hospital. Which also then brings me to the fact that the hospital that I then had to go into was the hospital that I had spent all the previous years in much of the building. So, for example, my son Philip, I had mentioned because of his chronic terminal illness, he would have had very, very severe eczema. So, we would have been downstairs in the dermatology department. We would have been upstairs in the two children's wards. Well, I think there was three at the time, but two we were in. One we never really were in at all. And I remember while I was sitting waiting to see the doctor, consultant, nurse, whatever, all the emotions that came back to me um, about all the years that I had sat there, and that in itself was more than my broken ankle. It just opened up all those memories, which obviously, if you've listened to my first two podcasts, I talk about a bit. I think because that's a big part of my life, and how I've survived and got to where I am today is mainly because I have held all my emotions inside, and try not to let them out at all. So emotional movies, animals eating other animals or killing them. I can't watch a lot of those things because they just open up my emotions too much, and I just could not afford to let them all out because I don't know that people would see me for months on end. It just always feels as if they're all encompassing for me. And I'm sure many of you out there listening will feel exactly the same and know exactly what I mean. So that in itself was a horrible experience for me. I know that hospital so well and had sat in it for hours and hours at appointments, mostly with Philip. Michael, God rest him, died at 23 months, and he had never really been in hospital at all, except one incident on the 18th of, at 18 months, which I think I mentioned in my earlier podcast, where he just needed some bloods. But with Philip, yes, Philip and I had spent, I mean, that was mostly my life, you know, um, up at the Ulster Hospital, sometimes at the City Hospital where Philip was born in the initial years, and for 16 years back and forward to the Great Ormond Street Hospital, which was a hospital that I made my own connections with. I always remember Philip's paediatrician saying to me, um, one day when we were chatting, he says to me, Caroline, I said to him, I'm just back from Great Ormond Street with Philip. And he says to me, how did you make that connection? How did you make that connection? Because I wasn't referred by them. Initially, I had been over with Professor Levinsky to find out if there had been any changes made to how they looked after children that had what's called Aldrich syndrome, and was told really that there wasn't anything, nothing really new, because it was a terminal illness, yes, and still is, but the issue was that because there was so few people um, that suffered from it, you know, the medical profession wasn't going to go out and specifically look into that particular disease. Obviously, they glean things from other diseases like, leukemia, aplastic anemia, all things like that, which aid other aspects of, you know, blood diseases or bone marrow diseases or whatever. So that was where we went. And my connection with Great Ormond Street was made through me being a spokesperson in Northern Ireland for the British Bone Marrow Donor Appeal, which again has come to the fore, not that particular appeal, but because of that young chap that has leukemia or blood cancer, as they speak of it, and who needs a bone marrow transplant or a stem cell transplant. So, but I'll speak about that at another time. So, yes, so that was me then, plastered up, not with alcohol, I might add, but leaving the Ulster Hospital then with this big plaster cast on my leg. And all I could think about was my classes. Oh my God, how long am I going to be in this? How are my classes going to manage? Maybe I could teach by sitting at the front of the class in a chair. All these things going through my head. So I got out of the hospital with a pair of crutches, and off I went for 2 weeks, told to come back in 2 weeks. So I'm back in 2 weeks, and the guy that I spoke to said to me, yep, that looks good. We're going to leave that for now. And if you come back in another 2 or 3 weeks, we might be able to put a light plaster on, or, a boot. So I thought, well, my God, that's great, because if I had a boot on, at least I could stand up sort of and be able to do something physical. So coming home with the plaster cast and the crutches, and it was devastating for me. As I'm sure it is for anybody that has broken any limbs at all, the repairing of that, how long it will take, will it repair itself properly? So lo and behold, I went back to the appointment, with a bit of optimism, as I mentioned earlier, and thought to myself, well, this will be great if they take this off and they And it was the consultant themselves that was there that day. And I just knew when he looked at me, there was something not right. And he said to me, Caroline, the break that you have is not going to heal itself in the position that your cast has been put on. So how they'd set my foot when they had put the cast on was not in the right position. So he said, you have the choice of either leaving it as it is, but you would have arthritis in it within a year, or we can operate on it and re-break it. And I can't tell you how I felt. It was bad enough for me having to sit in the waiting rooms of the areas that I was in and go back over all the years and the experiences and the sadnesses that I had. But now I was going to go in and have to have an operation. And believe you me, I was terrified of hospitals. I've always been, I mean, most people don't like hospitals, but I had a fear of them. And that fear lived in me because of my brother. He attended the Royal Victoria Children's Hospital for all of his 10 years of life. And years back then, excuse me, years back then, I mean, it was terrible because you couldn't get in to sit with your siblings or anything. You had to sit in the waiting room. And as I mentioned before, mummy was a single parent. She couldn't be in two places at one time. We were a small family. And I just the fear of living with somebody who had things that weren't right with them, and being a young carer, which I can say now I was, but at the time and through my life, you didn't think about that. You just had a younger sibling and there was things not right and you just got on with it. And but as I did mention as well in earlier podcasts, that it's only over the last 10 years that I've really realized the psychological effect of all those things that I experienced in my early years. For a lot of your life, I suppose you do blank things out just to be able to get on with things. And I mentioned that I had had a birthday, and just everything about the bullying and the things like that had just come back and sort of slapped me up the face with such a slap. I mean, it was a real thing that happened one day in the road, that brought all these things back to me. Excuse me. So, yes, the thought of having to go in. So he said to me, you can go home and think about it, and we'll give you a ring and see if you want to go ahead with the operation. So I came home and I thought about it, and I didn't particularly want to have arthritis in it within a year. It's bad enough having it in your body when you've no choice over it. But the thought of going back in and then them having to break it, and that was it's just horrible for me. But anyway, I decided that I would go ahead with that. Obviously very frustrated that I had been told that, in a couple of weeks it was going to be not too bad and things were going to get a little bit better with it. And here I was worse than I was before. They were going to have to re-break it again. So I went in anyway, and I had the operation, uh, woke up and immediately started to try and move my foot inside the cast. But there was something in the back of the heel of the cast, and it was just so painful. And it took me about 15 hours to get somebody to cut the cast off and see that whatever way the cast had been put on, there was an edge and it was cutting into my heel, and the inside of the cast was all full of blood at the back. That was almost worse than the broken ankle because it was just constant, when I would get up to well, walk, if you know what I mean, or crutch towards the bathroom. you could just feel this ripping. And it's the same kind of feeling as if you've ever rubbed your finger by mistake along a tin with a rough edge on it. And if it's cut the skin, that terrible initial feeling that almost makes you feel as if you're going to pass out. It's that kind of thing. Oh, it was horrible. And I kept saying to them, look, I'm really sorry, but there's something in the back of my, no. Well, there wouldn't be. I mean, that should be nice and smooth. And nobody wanted to listen to me at all. And I mean, I didn't make a pain of myself, but, I still kept trying to emphasize that there was something not right. So I had to keep that cast on me until the night staff came in. And by that time, I was nearly ready for tears. And somebody went away and spoke to their superior, and they very kindly came back and cut it off. And as soon as they cut it off, you could just see it. So once then I had to have it replastered again, and oh, it was just awful. It took me 12 weeks. I did all my own physio inside the cast. So what I would do with some of you who may be listening from the classes, when my foot was able to, I would flex it and push it as much as you can within a cast. I mean, we know there's only a small amount of movement, but I did that. I sort of turned my cast to the right, turned my cast to the left, just anything I could do to move those parts of my foot at all. And I remember I loved running when I was very young in school, and that the competitive side of running, when you do the round the track and things like that. But I'm not particularly built for running as such. And it's not something I particularly ever got into or thought I would really enjoy. Maybe if I had have, I would have, but for me personally, no. So I was out of my cast, and oh, any of you who will have broken any limb and had a cast on, you can see the depletion in the muscle. As soon as that cast comes off, it was horrendous to look at. But I went off on a holiday anyway. And what I did was I started to run along the promenade in Carahuela. I used to do that every morning, and to strengthen the leg so that I could get back to teaching as quick as possible. Because for me, it was like all my classes were waiting for me to get back. You'd meet people and they'd say, well, Karen, when do you think you'll be able to get back to classes? Not that they were being cruel or anything, but I took it as a compliment. So 12 weeks, I arranged cover for my classes. I rang a lady who I knew and asked her would she cover my classes until I was able to get back to them. And she very kindly did that. And the understanding was that when I was able to go back, then she was happy enough with that. And I had told the centre that I had made the arrangements and got cover. So there would be no hassle and no classes would be left without any instructor. And I think it was about 12 weeks, 12 and a half weeks, I went back and I taught my classes as always. I just wore a slightly reinforced shoe to benefit the broken ankle, and wore an ankle bandage for a good while to support it, and was able to get back and see all the faces of everyone that I loved from classes, and for them to see me and get back to where we were. But that brought me into thinking about society and our life and how we treat uh, disabled. I don't want to get too deep into that, especially at this moment in time anyway. But just even being in a wheelchair, obviously within that 12 weeks, I didn't want to sit on my backside in the house and do nothing. So um, I was shown how to get up and down the stairs with crutches. Now, I have to say personally, and this is my opinion, personally for me, that just wasn't going to work. Trying to put a crutch down on the stair below you before you go down on it, I found just, for me, I just didn't think it was right. Then trying to get up it, put an awful lot of strain on your arms and your shoulders, regardless of how you're shown and regardless of how that's the best way to do it. I didn't think it was. So I left the crutches at the bottom of the stairs. I went up on my knees and I came down on my bum. And I find that just as simple and no extra stress on your neck and shoulders. But that's for me. So my hubby Morris, we got a wheelchair, and we used to go out at night to go for a walk down around the sea. We went to the zoo in Belfast. Um, Difficult for Morris because it's quite hilly, so he had the job of pushing me up and down. But being in a wheelchair as a normally, I mean, I think it must be difficult for everybody. And obviously, the younger you start as that, it becomes part of your life and you adapt yourself to that. But for any of you out there that has broken a limb, especially the lower limbs, a foot, an ankle, a knee, a hip, and have to spend time in a wheelchair, it is so difficult. And the difficulty that you have will be among everybody that is in a wheelchair. I remember after my son died, just to go off on a tangent for a second, I remember being a carer, being involved with the British Bone Marrow Donor Appeal, allowing my children to be the faces of that appeal. So their faces were stuck on collection boxes, and that is a whole story all in its own, and for another time. But it's extremely difficult, and you give of yourself. But when you're in a wheelchair, yes, that's what I was going to say. Forgive me. I just I lost my train of thought there. But yes, after all of that, after Michael had died, I I found myself thinking, well, what am I going to do? Um, because my life had been so much about hospitals, illnesses, television, um, conversations and debates with journalists and interviews. I was on the Wogan show, Counterpoint with Brian Black, God rest him, and lots of things like that. And so I went back to college and did GCSEs, and did sociology, history, all stuff like that. Sociology was something I was always interested in, and later on down the line, I went back and did a degree in anthropology. Um, And anthropology, in layman's terms, is really all about people, you know, their culture, their society, how they live, how those structures work, and everything else. But I remember doing a part of sociology then, which was about disabled people's rights. And I have to say that, I mean, that's quite a lot of years ago. And I don't know that we have really come so far in changing disabled people's rights with regard to access to shops, to hotels, to bars, to services like bathrooms and toilets and things like that. And although it's written in law, it's like a lot of our society, there's debates, there's papers written up, there's this being said, and we'd like to do this, and we always want to do that. We want to think this, we want to make this better. But the bottom line is, do we make it better? With all our thinking and all our papers and all our lists that we've drawn up, and politicians that speak about it, is it really much, much more different than it really ever was? And as a person who had just broken their ankle and sitting in a wheelchair, brings me back to the fact that I don't know, is it? Yes, there are things that have changed. When we build houses, we make the doors wider to allow people who are in wheelchairs or things like that to get through them and things like that. But when you go being pushed around, people talk over you to the person that's pushing you. They might go, "Oh, hello, Caroline. How are you? Pleased to see you. How are you?" Blah. And then the conversation resorts to the person that's higher up. So you're going around, you're being pushed around the supermarket. I'm sure many of you Many of you may already know this. So you want something off the top shelf. If you were in that wheelchair on your own, there's no way you can get that. So then you're trying to tell the person that's pushing you, well, could you get us that? Then maybe they're reaching for the wrong item. It's not the one you want. There's a great deal of frustration involved in all of that. There's no doubt about that. And so being in a wheelchair not only affects your own psyche, but it also affects the people that are pushing you, the people that live in the house with you, because your whole life is different. It has been so curtailed. You don't have the same ability that you had. So, uh, I mean, it's just an awful thing, and it must be so difficult for people that have no choice in that at all. You know what I mean? People who get illnesses later in their life where it takes them into a wheelchair and adaptation to all of those things, and I mean, just awful. And in a way, when you think about it, I suppose people shouldn't think about it. Don't think about the things until they come to you in many respects, because that just makes you more depressed, more pessimistic, more down, and more miserable. But yeah, I mean, breaking one's foot or any limb is a whole different world and encompasses so many different things. Access to buildings, as I mentioned. You can no longer get upstairs. So if you're in a building that doesn't have a lift, well, that's no good, because how do you get upstairs? And a lot of places that we go into do have stairs. Not all of them have lifts anymore. Some shops and buildings still don't have their doors any wider than they might have done. And what about if you've got a wheelchair and you're trying to get into a building that has, those circular uh, access like you go in and the door goes round in a circle and you just go in behind it. If you've ever touched that by mistake and it stops and it doesn't move, and can you imagine? It's just frightening. And then of course the person you're relying on to push you. Do they push you too slow? Do they push you too fast? Do they ram you off the curb and nearly break your back in the wheelchair? Now, I can laugh at some of those things, and I'm sure some of you can. But when you think about it, really, if you think even of an older person relying on somebody else, who's not going to think about those things, who just knows that you push this, any kind of chair, push chair, wheelchair, off a curb, you have to think about the person that's in it. How are you pushing that wheelchair? And most people don't think about it. I mean, my hubby and I more often cracked horns together about things like that, because it depends as well. Does the other person think along the same lines as you do? I would think about those things because that's been my whole life. But I suppose, you know, somebody else doesn't. They just know you have to go down the step, you just wheel the thing off and down you go. So, yeah, extremely difficult. But anyway, I was going to mention about, because of my accident, I had to go and see a psychologist or psychiatrist or whatever they send you to anyway, up a nice leafy road in Belfast. Now, I was not looking forward to this at all, because if I thought that I had to discuss my personal life or feelings or emotions with somebody that I didn't know, I mean, a lot of those things I wouldn't even discuss with people that I do know. One, because life is all relative. What's big to me is small to somebody else, and vice versa. And when people do want to ask me questions about things like that in my past life, I'm nearly apologetic to them because I don't want to ruin their day. I don't want them to feel sad, but I know they have an interest. So the thought of opening up to anybody, to be honest with you, and this is why, in a way, I suppose for me, this seems so much easier for me, because it allows me just to speak out as if there's nobody listening to me. Maybe there isn't. Maybe there isn't anybody listening to me, but it doesn't matter because it's getting it out of my head. So, anyway, I drove up myself. I got out. I went into this house, and this gentleman came out and met me and shook my hand. And I went in and sat down in front of him, and he proceeded to tell me why I was there, and that he was going to, ask me questions and try and get some information about me as a person. And so we proceeded. And he went right back to my childhood. Now, what that had to do with a broken ankle, I'm not quite sure of, but right back to my childhood, my upbringing, school I went to, um, my children, my marriage, excuse me. And I was sitting there and I thought, there's obviously, a legal reason why you have to ask me all these questions, but in essence, really, what has that got to do with the fact that my ankle is broken and somebody has requested that I go to speak to somebody to glean what specific piece of information? Now, all you legalists out there will know that, and I have a pretty good idea myself. But so he shook my hand, the appointment was over, and off I went into my car and drove myself home. So a number of weeks later, could have been months actually, I got this letter came through to me, and it was a duplicate of the letter that had been sent about my appointment. And the word stoic, I always thought of the word stoic as something that described something that was cold, something that was hard, something that was, in essence, I suppose there's an element of that. But really, in the great scheme of things, it's something that survives, something that lasts, something that carries on. So this gentleman, anyway, proceeded to say, yes, that he met me and he found me very, very plausible. Actually remarked on how I was dressed. Now, what has that got to do with my broken ankle or how it happened? Um, and I still have the letter. And a few more sentences about what we discussed, but that I was a very stoic person and had had a lot of tragedies in my life to come through, and that but yes, I had a associated disorder. Now, those of you who may not be legally minded, associated disorder, work it out yourself. Disorder means something that is just not quite right, and associated means association to something else or an other. And so that was the essence of my whole conversation and my speaking about my personal life, my tragedies. He also asked me how my accident had affected me. And I said to him, well, it's very difficult for me who has a very active life. I have people that need me. So my life has been completely changed for the last 12, 14 weeks. Um, I was not in control of my own life to a certain point because you were relying on other people. If you had to go somewhere, you were relying on other people to move you around. You didn't have the independence to pick your own shopping. You needed somebody to help you if it was high up on a shelf. You needed somebody to help you to get through a door that was too small and when you were in the wheelchair. And for me personally, I had my thoughts in my head were so highlighted. Now, the associated disorder he put down to my thinking. Okay, so I thought a lot about death. I thought about the people that I love. I thought about being told that how I would react if I was told that they had died. Now, this man spoke to me for maybe 40 minutes, and that's all he knew about me was what I had told him. His associated disorder was more or less saying that this lady is thinking and feeling the way she is because of her association with breaking her ankle in the accident. Fair enough. But associated disorder, is that really something? It's a couple of words that somebody might think, oh my God, associated disorder. When really, in essence, if you think about it, that's a description of somebody who's broken their ankle and their thoughts and feelings are related to that. Now, what I will tell you is those thoughts and those things that I mentioned, I have them every day of my life. He had in his letter associated disorder, and I would expect this to last for maybe 9 to 12 months. And then this lady will, in other words, return back to her non associated disorder. Now, that was a million, a billion, a trillion times untrue, because associated disorder, if you want to put that name to it, I've had all my life, because I lived with a terminally ill brother. I lived with two terminally ill children. I was associated with hospitals all my life, both here and in England, for all different reasons. So my thinking pattern, my thoughts, my things about, losing people, death, sadness, yes, those things were heightened, but I'd had them all my life. He made no association to my thinking pattern having been there from the past. He was relating the associated disorder in connection to the accident. So there you go. And he reckoned that, I have it in writing, he reckoned that in 9 to 12 months, that would all disappear and I would be myself again. But myself was that. So just think on that, for goodness sake. But anyway, so I think I'll leave it there for now. I've covered quite a lot, I think. Just one thing leads to something else, and then something else, and then something else, as life always does. So I'm off today. I'm looking forward to my two classes in the morning, my power Pilates in the park, and my sea power Pilates in the sea afterwards. And I love just sometimes to go down to I go to the sea in between teaching my classes anyway. Not to swim, but to work out. But I love just to, in between my sets that I do, just to leave my arms out on the water, close my eyes, just sort of find my float point, not lying, but just sort of sitting on the water with the tips of my toes on the sand and just breathe. Your breath, folks, is one of the most beautiful stabilizing factors that you have about yourself. If you can just bring yourself to slow your breathing down, and I always teach my classes and remind them to try and breathe in for a count of 6 through your nose. Hold the breath for 2 or 3 seconds if you can, and then breathe your breath out and try and breathe out for a count of 10. Don't force it out, just press it gently out. Listen to it as it goes up through your nose. Listen to it as it leaves your body through your mouth. And you'll find that that will bring a little bit of relaxation into your body. Wonderful way, and especially in the sea. I love to sit in the water and I love to watch the seagulls, or I think they're smaller than seagulls actually, just dive bomb into the water way out in front of me. It's magnificent. You look out to the horizon, and when your eyes are open, sure, you might see the Stena, but in essence, there's usually nothing out there in front of you, and it's just lovely. So until I see you the next time, or you hear me, yeah, think on your breath. If you're not used of deep breathing, and our bodies are not necessarily designed for deep breathing because your mind wanders, so you just resort back to your shallow breath. But practice your deep breathing even when you're in bed at night, or maybe when you feel really stressed, or there's just things that are bothering you. Just take a moment out. It's not very often that we get moments to ourselves where we're not all encompassed about the rest of the people around us or our lives or things that are worrying us. But just think about your breath. Just draw it in nicely into your midsection, not into your upper throat or chest. Just breathe into the middle of your body. Hold your breath for 2 or 3 seconds and then just let it go. And if you're not used to deep breathing, you may find breathing in for 6 counts quite difficult. And you'll definitely find your exhalation even more difficult. So start by breathing in for 3 and breathe out for 5. But whatever way you do it, just make sure that your out breath is longer than your in breath. And just relax the shoulders as you breathe. You can do it anywhere. You can do it sitting in your office. You can do it when you're watching the telly. But ideally, you wouldn't want to be watching anything. You don't want to be distracted. You want to try and still your mind. And it's extremely beneficial, even for the short time that you might do it. So have a go at it anyway. In for 6, out for 10. That's your aim, if possible. And enjoy the rest of your day. Have a lovely weekend. And I'll post this up shortly. Okay? One foot in front of the other. Keep your pecker up and breathe. Lots of love. Bye-bye.